welcome to another Workshop Wednesday brought to you by schoolofbookkeeping.com, where it's casual conversations for serious workflows. And there's really nothing more serious than purchase order matching, right, Charlie?
That is right, for sure.
All right. Well, joining us today, we have a full house here. So what do we have? 5 more, and we'll have a Brady Bunch. But we have 4 people here. So as always, Rachel is joining us here, but we have friends at MakersHub joining us, talking about some of their new features that we want to kind of showcase here for you today. But Charlie and Nick, you want to go ahead and introduce yourselves?
Yeah, sure thing. I'll start, and then I'll introduce what we've built and why we've built it, and then Nick's going to take you through a quick demo of the functionality, which I think anybody who is operated in this realm and been part of a PO-sensitive process will really appreciate and recognize as quite unique. But before getting ahead of myself or ourselves, my name's Charlie Howe. I'm one of the co-founders of MakersHub. We started the business in 2022 and have been at it building at a very rapid pace since then. And my partner, my co-founder, came from this world in a very deep and intimate way, and it was really the impetus to start the business and to build the business. Though we have a huge component of clients that are in the accounting world by virtue of what we do and the arena in which we play, neither of us comes from an accounting background. We both come from basically an operating background, and he was an engineer by trade, an electrical engineer, and ran an advanced manufacturing company where they built very large and expensive production facility style equipment and had a very rigorous PO-driven procurement process. And the complexity from a finance and back office perspective that fell out of that, though it was necessary to run the business, was a big limiting factor to their growth, given they couldn't find technological support to automate some of the PO matching and item receiving elements that make that at any kind of scale a really challenging process. So his lived experience is why we've built what we've built that we'll show you today. And we're excited. Thank you for the audience. But I'll pass it to you, Nick, and then I'll talk a little bit about what you're going to see, and then we'll just dive right in, Dan, if that sounds like a good plan.
Yeah, we're gonna, like, before we jump into the the nuts and bolts of what MakersHub can do for this, I do want to have a little chat about what is the business case that we're solving for here, and I want to talk a little bit about with Rachel as the real world implications of this solution that you've created to kind of automate this process. But Nick, who are you?
Well, that's a long story, Dan, but no. Yes, my name's Nick. I'm a platform specialist here at MakersHub. I helped test out this module and I'm on the support side at MakersHub. So anyone reach out with questions, the man that will be responding. Want to thank you for having us here today, though, Dan, Rachel.
So this is kind of like your bucket of expertise as far as you take all the credit and the blame.
Nick just gave a customarily the undersell of the century in terms of who he is and what he brings to the team. Nick, you can give a little bit of your background, but Nick was a consultant who did NetSuite implementations for big companies. And he knows, workflow and software like, the back of his proverbial hand. And so we're super fortunate to have been able to, bring him into the startup dark side, if you will, and be able to deploy his expertise to a customer set who really value his experiences.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you look at some of the AP solutions that are out there that synchronize with QuickBooks, and I did put in a link in the chat and the comments so that people want to understand, well, what in the world is MakersHub to begin with. They can review that. When you guys came on the QB Power Hour, we talked very, very lengthy at that sort of things, but really want to focus on this concept or this workflow of PO matching, or some folks will call it three-way PO matching, and I was talking to Rachel before we started today. It's like, what do you know about PO matching? And we kind of went down a little rabbit hole because that's what we wanted to kind of think about first, is like, what is this whole concept? And Rachel, if you could kind of explain what not the QuickBooks side, not the AP management side of things, but what is it? What is the business use case or need or matching their POs when somebody says we have PO matching?
Yeah, so we were talking about this before we started, and yeah, it can be a little confusing because for me, matching in QuickBooks means one thing, but mainly we're talking about the inventory workflow, right? And I mean, I guess you'd really only use okay, anyway, and I'm always like going down rabbit holes, but yeah, so like, let's just say you're, manufacturing, because I deal with a lot of those guys. So if you're creating a PO, you're creating a purchase order, I'm saying, hey, I want to buy a whole bunch of stuff, right? So I'm going to buy a whole bunch of stuff. Let's say I'm buying a whole bunch of materials because I'm going to manufacture those into things. So if I'm going to make an order, I'm going to make a purchase order to buy a whole bunch of stuff, then presumably it's going to arrive. So until it arrives, I've got this purchase order that's basically saying, I've ordered 100 widgets. Well, in the real world, is 100 widgets going to arrive? Maybe not. Maybe half of it will. Maybe all of it will, but some of it's damaged. So we all know that working in the real world, that not everything happens exactly as it does on paper. So when the stuff arrives, usually our procedure is we want to match the things that have arrived with that purchase order. And then we want to receive those goods into inventory. And then if we're talking about QuickBooks, that's usually at that point where we're going to then create that bill in an accrual process. So there could be, any reasons maybe why the quantity that arrives isn't exact, but we have to have this procedure in place so we can account properly for actually what arrived. And then we can do our, financial documents according to that. But we have to have these procedures in place. So I'm guessing this can help with that. I don't know anything about MakersHub, so I'm really excited.
Right. So this is a blind reaction.
I know. And I just texted my employee, Jamie. I was like, Jamie, can you come on to the workshop Wednesday? Like, you have to watch what's going on with MakersHub, because there's a lot of need for this. Like, a lot of what we do on the PO side is there's a lot of things lacking. So I'm really excited and I didn't catch the power hour. So
yeah. So for people
I'm upset.
Sorry.
No, it's like, it's funny, not to go down a crazy digression, but I have a 6-year-old and we're reading the Harry Potter books. We're on the 4th one, and the first 50 pages of every book is like rehashing everything we missed in the previous books.
Yeah.
Catch up basically. And so we're trying to do a catch up for people who aren't familiar with MakersHub, rather than just diving into the PO matching, but we will focus there. And so just to take a step back in terms of what is this thing? Rachel, I think you did an excellent job explaining it, but what is it when we talk about three-way matching or PO matching, and why is it important to a business? So let's define three-way matching. The definition of three-way matching, and though it is often or I would say almost always, for a company who does true inventory management, you're definitely going to have a three-way matching process, but not only for people who are doing inventory. There's a big benefit to companies running a PO-driven procurement process, irrespective of doing inventory control. And
good. I'm so glad you're talking about that, because that's kind of what I was trying to say, but I didn't really want to get into that and say the wrong thing, because there's a lot of other people that are watching this that don't necessarily do it.
And I just want to make sure that we go into, anybody who's on the phone and doesn't work with inventory-driven clients, that doesn't automatically mean, hey, turn off, this is not relevant to me. It may or may not be, but it's not exclusively for people who are doing inventory control. And so what is three-way matching? Three-way matching is taking the purchase order, it's taking three economic records and making sure that they align. And those three economic records are the purchase order, right? And what is the purchase order? The purchase order is I need to go and buy some stuff from a vendor. And before we go and actually place that order, I'm going to have some kind of procedure in place that allows the person to go out and incur the liability that the purchase order represents, right? You haven't necessarily spent the money yet, but it is a liability to the business. And it's a liability that you wouldn't otherwise see if you didn't have the purchase order process. So you have a purchase order in your business for basically cash flow purposes and understanding what your liabilities are before the money has actually left the store, right? So you have the purchase order. What is it that I'm buying? What items? What in what quantity at what price? And then, Rachel, as you were talking about, those items get shipped, right? And they come into the store or the shipping and receiving clerk. And with that shipment comes an item receipt. What got sent? And does the purchase order match what got sent? I ordered 100 widgets at $100 per widget. Did I get sent 100 widgets? Yes or no? Maybe I got sent 80, maybe I got sent 120. So does the order for what we wanted to buy match what we were actually sent? And then the third piece of the three-way matching process is the bill. So they sent the goods and now they billed us for them. And does what they billed us for match what they sent and what we agreed we were going to pay, right? And if all three of those things align, then fantastic. But in virtually all cases in the real world, as you talked about, Rachel, they don't align. They undersend, they oversend, they undercharge, they never undercharge.
Damage.
Yeah. So the first challenge is how do you take these three economic records and make sure they match up? And then why is it important for the business? It's important for the business mainly for preventing overpayment, right? Hey, we had an agreement. The purchase order is a contract. I said that we were going to buy this stuff from you, and we were going to agree to pay the amount for this number of goods. That is a contract, so I can hold you to that. The other piece is cash flow, right? We can plan out cash flow. I'm going to go do a big job. I can make sure that I don't incur more costs to do that job than I'm going to get paid for if we hold to a stringent purchase order process, right? I am going to buy the materials necessary to do this job, and I've only agreed to purchase stuff where I'm going to have a positive margin. And the last piece that I think is really important is visibility for the business. Imagine a world where you're not doing a purchase order driven process, and I look at my bank account and I say, all right, I've got X number of bills in QuickBooks, and that's 20 grand, and I've got payroll coming up, and I've got 50 grand in the bank. I'm good to go and run that payroll. But Dan had gone and before I knew it, called a supplier and said, I need to buy $50,000 worth of lumber, and I got that bill tomorrow, right? The only way that you would know about that liability is if it existed somewhere in the accounting system, and that's what the purchase order is really for.
Yeah, I typically would explain it to people who would call into Intuit when I worked there, is that the purchase order is your wish list that you write to Santa Claus, and then the receiving, the item receipt is what you actually got. Like, dear Santa, I'd love to have a bicycle, and then Santa delivers some coal, right? So there's always that reconciliation of the wish list versus the reality, and that's really what this is all helping to solve for businesses, right?
Yeah, that's right.
I have a quick question, because I know you said that the purchase order is sort of that point in which we create a liability, but with regards to, do you take ownership of that liability at the point of purchase order, or actually when the goods are received? So are you meaning that we actually have a liability on the books at the point of the purchase order, or upon when we take ownership of the goods? Let's just say, it's not FOB shipping point. Let's say it's FOB destination. Like, do you have that distinction?
So I will answer that question more from the business operations perspective, and you guys should answer it from an accounting perspective, because there's interpretability from an accounting perspective of what you should do. From a business perspective, you have incurred that obligation.
I see what you're saying. Okay.
Right. When you have issued a purchase order to a vendor, you have indebted, if you will, the business to that obligation. And it is
I see. Not necessarily from an accounting perspective, but
that's right.
Yes, so, and that is very helpful. That is very helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. And purchase orders from an accounting perspective, you guys should tell us, not the other way around. That is a non-posting transaction. It is not a true accounting. And
it's actually really important to understand that it isn't technically a liability until you receive the goods into inventory on your books.
That's correct. But the business has an obligation to make that payment.
Yes. Yeah. Well, you're making a promise. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's one of these places where the accounting record has a mismatch, frankly, with the actual real world existence of the business, and why doing this in a proper way, in a functional way, is really important. And there are a bunch of reasons that, without going into, again, unnecessary depth and detail with people on the phone for whom this isn't, hyper relevant, but for anybody it is, we can go through it. The way that many systems do the purchase order creation in QuickBooks is very faulty. And the way they do it is if you create a purchase order in a third-party system, they will convert it to QuickBooks for you as a bill. And that helps from the visibility standpoint, but it's really problematic from the standpoint of how am I actually running the business? Because one, I've got a bill in QuickBooks. Am I paying that bill? Well, I don't know. Did we get this stuff? Did we not get this stuff? There's a bill in QuickBooks. I should pay the bill. Well, is the pricing correct? Is it what we agreed to on the purchase order? Yes or no? And so the way that systems today deal with this sort of pretty complex three-way match process doesn't really marry to how, in our view, it should be done.
Yeah, not all. Some of them have the option to sync it as a PO. Some of them you can toggle back and forth between syncing as a PO or a bill. However, those are usually very complex systems that you're dealing with, and they're pricey. And so, you're in some external IMS, and it's like this one little function of a million zillion things. And so, not everybody's in something like that.
Right.
Yeah. So one of just to kind of recap, some of the things that I really love about MakersHub and its solution is its speed and ability to extract the information from the source document, whatever that happens to be. And you can certainly check those out on the Power Hour of how well it does those things. But I'm going to toss it over to Nick here to kind of illustrate what this new functionality that you've incorporated into MakersHub. So let me go ahead and
while Nick brings this up, just to give you the background, basically the big innovation that MakersHub has brought to the AP process is we can take a bill, basically in any form that we get it, and we can read the entirety of that bill down to the line item level, and
very quickly.
So there's nothing manual or human in this. This is all done by technology that we built in-house exclusively to do this. And so that, first challenge of, hey, we've got this bill on the left, can you give it its appropriate data structure, is really non-trivial. And it was a big, big lift to solve, but one that we have solved. And now, having given this bill its structure and being able to take all of this data from the bill and contextualize it appropriately allows us to do a bunch of other things to build on top of that data extraction. And one of those things that we're going to talk about today is, okay, now we have a structured PO and we have a structured bill. We can match those two things, and we can tell you, does it match? Does it not match? If it does not match, where does it match? And which PO should we marry this to? Okay, do I want to close a PO against a partially filled order? Do I want to, in a case where the billed price doesn't match the PO price, that doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong. There might be many cases where you say, it's a small differential. I don't want to upset this vendor. I'm just going to pay the price that they billed, right? There's no categorical kind of truth to what's right or what's wrong. The challenge is in identifying the discrepancies and giving you a tool to basically automate the correction or reconciliation of those discrepancies. So Nick, I'll hand it to you and I'll stop talking.
Awesome. Yeah, and as Charlie mentioned, I have this bill on the left from Pittsburgh Air System, and for Rachel, for your benefit, I have not touched this at all. This is what MakersHub has extracted on its own. I didn't go in offline and start typing all this by hand. This is all extracted by our system. And
line by line.
Line by line. Yep, I wasn't sitting here, no Wi-Fi. This was all system found the item. It read the description from the bill, put it all in the system. No more manually typing up, 15 lines of items with descriptions and looking at the quantity, price, double checking that you're right. No more of that.
Or having to import and like parse the lines or any of that.
Exactly. Looking for that one spelling error that's throwing or the one space throwing an error or anything like that. Just toss, drag and drop it in, or send an email in, automatically read it. So there are a few ways you can do this. One is the first one I will go over, where you have a bill and you know you have a purchase order against it. The second is you don't have a bill, but you want to create a bill from a purchase order. So I'll be going over the first one first. And if you see up here on the top right, we have the open purchase orders. What this does is it takes all your open purchase orders from QuickBooks from that vendor and will list them on the dropdown. So for this one, this bill is for 2 purchase orders. So first I'm going to go to 1015 and it will pull the data from QuickBooks, display the PO on the bottom left. You can see I have all the quantities and items on the purchase order with the pricing. Now, this is fantastic, but the real magic comes in with matching these lines. Again, MakersHub offers a few ways to do this. The first way is the match the bill, which will use the description item to try and automatically match the lines to the bill. The second way is you can do a drop down and it will list all the items on the PO where you can manually match it to the line. And the third, which goes into the manual creation, is I can click add the bill and it will automatically move the lines from the PO onto the bill.
So cool.
I love that.
Yeah, so you're gonna like it even more. I haven't even gotten to the actual demo part yet, and she's impressive. So always a good sign. So now I click the match the bill. Boom. It matches these lines directly to the bill. You can see that these bottom 3 items were not on this purchase order. So you can see that, let's pull up this one, line number 8, this item XPM 9090 matches up directly with it, so it automatically just matched it. And if you'll notice something else that stands out, we can see that there's a price discrepancy. So we can see that on the bill, they actually charged us $57.24 instead of the $48.80 that was on the purchase order. And I like that it calls out, the percentage difference. It highlights it clearly, so you don't have to go through and look, oh, that's $358, that's $358. No more of that. Automatically will display and easily scroll through to be able to view those discrepancies.
Very cool.
Yeah, I always like that one. I think it calls it out so easily. And like I said, no more line by line checking anymore. You can automatically see it.
Yeah, and I would love to hear, from anybody in the audience or, Rachel, yourself directly. We acknowledge and we put a ton of care and thought into one, how this should be built, but more how it should look. And for somebody for whom this is an abstract problem that we're talking about that hasn't incurred it directly, like I was, you look at this and you say, wow, there's a lot. There's a lot going on here. And I'm trying to make kind of heads or tails of what I'm seeing on the screen. And we readily acknowledge that. For somebody whose job this is what we were asked for over and over and over again. How can I get all of these pieces of information in one place where I can look at it in one place and reconcile kind of in my brain, if you will, what is taking place, and then allow it to be interoperable with one another. And so there is an immense amount of engineering that went into allowing all of this data that you see on the screen and say, wow, this is pretty overwhelming, to basically be visible in one place and to interact with one another. So I say that just to, alleviate anybody's concern on the phone who's saying, I'm looking at this and I have no idea what I'm looking at. Because
it's not overwhelming, because the way that I like to do things is that I cross-check both ways. And that's really the best way to reconcile something. Is it if it's in one and not the other, and then if it's in the other and not the one. So I like to be able to have the things like this so I can check both ways.
In one place, exactly.
Yeah, and I also am obsessed with getting a match. Like, I would match every single thing in the world if I could. So if I'm seeing that I'm not getting a match, my question that I have isn't necessarily like with how does it work, because I can very clearly see like, oh yeah, cool. And then it's like line item. So, if maybe something is off with the line item, then, I can easily fix it or go to it or identify it. But a lot of my clients are using this system where they're getting a bill and then the bill goes in and whatnot. But my question is more for like electronic payments and things like that. Like we have a lot of clients that just have things on auto pay. And a lot of it is, we just sort of let the things hit through the bank feeds because we don't necessarily have the time to, put in a bill and then match it to the bill and yada, yada. So are some things, especially that are, on recurring or whatnot. So I guess my question that I'm asking is this really more appropriate for this kind of like traditional procurement process where I'm going to put in a PO, or I'm going to automate a PO, or have the system create a PO, then a bill, then the payment? I mean, is that really, and is your intention to do that for all expenses?
Yeah, great question. So, and this sort of goes back to, we're starting this conversation on book 4 or chapter 3, if you will.
Okay.
What you see today, what we're showing you here, this is discreetly and explicitly for somebody who's running a PO-driven process, obviously, right? Mm-hmm. MakersHub at large is not, right? This is a module within MakersHub that is specifically designed for people who are doing PO-driven procurement and are looking for technological enhancements to that process. But the vast majority of our customer base, because up till now we didn't have this, are just people who have regular way AP. And some of that is bills, some of that is credit card payments, some of it is, whatever. And so for customers who have no POs, that's totally fine from a MakersHub perspective. MakersHub is designed for people who have more of a true AP process. So I'm getting a lot of bills, and managing those bills are part of it. But for virtually every customer who that is, they also have credit cards, and they also have receipt transactions. And so we have analogous modules for how we handle those recurring transactions or things that are on auto pay. I think what the difference between MakersHub is really, you do have to want to care a little bit about what you're buying and how you account for what you're buying. If you are a business, and this is not meant as a pejorative at all, it's just, there are certain businesses who say, hey, when I get a bill or when I buy something and put it on a credit card, the sole job to be done is to pay it. And I don't care really how we account for it or what we really bought. It all goes into some kind of generalized expense bucket. That's not important to how we run our business. MakersHub probably isn't the best tool for that style of company. For a company who says, hey, we have regular way AP, so we have bills and we need a process for the bills, but then we also have things that we buy on a credit card. And when we buy things on a credit card, I want a way to capture what we bought and how we account for it, because I care about what we bought and how we're accounting for it, irrespective of how we paid for it. And that's what is beneficial for the users in MakersHub, or for people who are saying, I don't even care. If we bought a bunch of stuff in Home Depot, I don't really care. I need a way to deal with that. I need a receipt process, and can I solve for it in your process? You absolutely can, but the main pain point is the bills. Hey, it's a really manual process. I need some organization. I need a much more kind of higher functioning tool to garner approvals and to issue payments and all of those elements. Does that answer your question, Rachel?
Yeah. Dan, go ahead, because I have another question, but you go ahead.
Well, the two clients that I first introduced MakersHub to were like completely on different opposite ends of the spectrum when it came to what they needed it for, and it solved both problems, right? Because one was in QuickBooks Online. They were using QuickBooks Online as their inventory management source of truth, and it synchronizes line item detail, specifically to them. The other one was on QuickBooks Enterprise, and they just only used these bills to put it to marketing expense. So they totally had completely different needs for it, and it did the same thing for both of them. It just solved their, streamlined their process.
That's really cool. So now, okay, because I was just going to say, so let's say you're manufacturing, whatever. Obviously, you wouldn't be able to do that in QuickBooks Online because it doesn't support manufacturing. But so it's not like you could take a purchase order and then map it to the item, and have it be assembly items and then so on and so forth.
Yeah. But
that
automation, you can do that
in the QuickBooks Online. That automation I 100% want outside of QuickBooks Online. But like if you're managing if you're reselling stuff, like Dan and I usually say, you're buying and reselling, and you're managing that in QuickBooks. And so you're able to see this, and then you're increasing your inventory items, your inventory balance at the item level, line item by line item. Is that like basically what you would do with this example, right? Like let's say you're buying.
And we can do you a number of iterations better than that. So for people who are doing what you're talking about, and Dan's example is a great one of that. For people who are doing really hardcore inventory management, there are a bunch of additional privileges over and above the one that you talked about, Rachel. One being, okay, I got a bill for a bunch of stuff and we itemize it all, but before I can even account for it, let alone the manual elements of accounting for it, which we can talk about in a second, that item needs to exist. So I need to go into QuickBooks and create that item.
Oh, that's really cool. Right? Yeah, because that happens a lot too, where then you'd have to, it's a new item, so then you'd have to create it. Yeah.
Exactly. So what you see on the screen, Nick, if you want to just toggle off the POPs for a second, you see those little green check marks. So what those green check marks on the item, SKU number say is this is a known item. This item exists in your QuickBooks already. So we're going to map it to the existing item. But this yellow shopping bag one in a different example is saying this is a new item. This doesn't exist because we've cross-referenced your item list in QuickBooks. We know it's new. And so you can set up and have the system automate its creation for you. And you would do that in the integration mapping tool. And what the integration mapping tool does down in the lower right is basically allow our customers to capture the logic of why when they buy something or get billed for something, they account for it in the way that they do. And because we can read and understand so much information from the bill, like the vendor, the item number, the description, you can basically build out this logic that, hey, when I buy from this vendor, this is where we put it. Or when I buy something with the description of X, Y, or Z, because it's X, Y, or Z, this is how we account for it. And so the first, I won't go into a ton of detail on this, but there are 4 tabs that you can see. And each tab answers a different question about how MakersHub will communicate to QuickBooks about the record creation that we do. And so the first question that we answer is, we have a bill. That bill has a number of line items on it. Are we treating those line items as true items or as category details? And so for somebody who's doing a lot of itemization, you would say, okay, when we buy from this vendor, we itemize that stuff. And then having recognized that those should be treated as items, the second tab is the chart of accounts. And the chart of accounts says, okay, when we encounter an item and that item is new, we'll create it for you. where do you want us to create it for you by virtue of the facts and circumstances of what's on the bill? And you can do this all the way down to, cost multipliers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, what asset account, if it's true inventory. And then same thing with the category. If it's a category detail, if it's something you're going to expense, where and why.
Yeah.
And so all of this stuff for somebody who's doing like a really hygienic, manual heavy inventory process, we're able to take a lot of the work out of it and make it much more hygienic and consistent and less error prone.
Cool.
So Nick, I think we hijacked your demo.
Yeah.
Oh, no worries at all. It's good to flesh out kind of more details.
It's a great conversation. But so in your example that you had there, you have some discrepancies. What does this allow you to do with those discrepancies now that you've identified them?
Yeah, that really depends on the user side. If say I know that this is actually the correct price on the purchase order, what you can do is you can click this copy. It'll automatically move the purchase order price into the bill. Or if you say, I'm not actually sure this should not be correct, but I need to reach out to the vendor, confirm, you can forward this bill to the vendor and add some notes saying, I received this price. What's going on? Why am I getting charged $10 more all of a sudden?
And then, and this ties into some of the other things that I really love about MakersHub. When you do that from here, it will send the bill and with the attachment so that they can review it, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So moving on, I still have these 3 items I haven't matched. So to do that, you would just pull up your other purchase order. Shows on the side, same as the other one. Again, I can go through, manually select the items from the drop down, automatically match those up. No price discrepancies here, everything balanced up. So I have everything matched up. All my lines from the bill have now matched out to my purchase orders. You can, in MakersHub, you can create your own unique workflow of who do you want to see this, who do you want to approve. If I needed to go to my manager or a group of users, you can do that. Right now, I'm the only purchase order approver for my demonstration purposes. Once I click approve, it will automatically pull up the next bill for me to review and approve if I need to. But once I approve something, it will go to this accounts payable tab. And once it hits the accounts payable tab, it will sync over to your QuickBooks environment. So now
I have a quick question. What if it's already been paid? Will it find a payment?
Yeah, so if this has already been paid and it's a receipt, if you will. So if you open that up, Nick. So let's say you're reviewing this in the bills tab, right? And you're looking to say, this is not a bill. This has already been paid. This is a receipt transaction. You would go to actions in the upper right, and you would say move to receipts, right? And we're going to change the interface very slightly for you. We're still going to read the amount that was paid. We're still going to have all of the dates. We're still going to have all of the line item capture of what was purchased and how do we want to account for that. And for a number of our users, that's really beneficial. Again, if my goal is I really want to understand the cost structure of the business, it doesn't matter how I paid for something, right? Did we capture what we bought and how we accounted for it? But in this, we're going to say, okay, this is a receipt, not a bill. So we're going to link all of your attached payment accounts from your QuickBooks chart of accounts. You're going to say I paid it on this credit card or what have you. And then you can approve the receipt. And what MakersHub does from here is we create a bill record and a bill payment credit card record that everything trues to 0. And that bill payment credit card record will match to your credit card feed, but it will match with the benefit of that bill record being in QuickBooks so that you have all of the information about what was purchased and how we accounted for it, as opposed to saying somebody spent $2,000 at Home Depot. That's the extent of what I know. I don't know anything more than that.
So that I like, but I was more asking, like, will it find the payment? Let's say you have people in your organization that are buying the stuff on the credit card and you don't know. And so, but I have the bill, so I'm going to go back and I'm going to enter it. But if I don't know that somebody had already created or they had already paid for it. Maybe it had already created an expense. Now I'm creating a duplication. So will it find that payment?
As long as it's in the credit card feed in QuickBooks, yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah, it's going to match because what we create is just a payment against that credit card record, right?
Okay.
The credit card record.
Okay.
All right. So Nick, you were originally saying that there are 2 ways to do this. Did we cover both of them, or did we?
No. So that was the first way, where you get that bill in and you want to match those line items. The next way is you can manually create a bill from a PO if needed. So you go up here, you can click manually add that bill, select your supplier you want to create it for, along with your invoice number, and click add bill. And up here, I could select, you can see now, because this is the same vendor, I completely closed out that other PO. Now I only get one PO showing up because it's synced to QuickBooks, and I get that information back that that PO has been closed. I select the PO. You can see it pulls up my quantities I have received. So you can see this is 1 of 1, and this line has now been grayed out. You can see I have 1 received against 2. And what I like is you can also manually select the lines. You don't have to add all the lines. So if I select those 2, then add the bill, I can manually create this bill from those 2 PO line items. Taking out that manual adding of each line, don't have to manually type those in anymore. And this would follow the same process, add these PO lines. Once it's approved, we'll flow to QuickBooks as a bill and close out those line items. But I really like this feature. You can also see the amount left on the PO as well. So it pulls all that information from QuickBooks. No need to wonder how many items you have, or if you've received 3, 2, all that information is displayed right here, along with your bill, if you have a bill.
And is this meant to go from QBO to MakersHub only, or could it like push my received quantities to like Shopify or something?
So it's fully 2-way between QuickBooks and MakersHub, QuickBooks Desktop or QuickBooks Online, and then any other third-party tool that is speaking to QuickBooks, we use basically QuickBooks as the arbiter. So as long as right, as long as there's, you basically use QuickBooks as the API, for instance.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. Well, I appreciate both of you joining us here and giving Rachel a blind reaction to MakersHub, kind of jumping her in the deep end of the pool.
Yeah,
so to speak.
Of course. Glad to be here.
So initial thoughts, Rachel, on what you saw here?
Oh, it's so cool. I mean, I just love the ability just to like have it like extrapolate all the data into the lines, and it's really, I really appreciate that. That's very cool. Oh, can I like, does it have like a fetch? Like, could I connect it to something and then it would fetch these bills in?
So we can ingest bills a number of different ways, and the most common one is email. So for people who have, let's say, hey, we have an accounting inbox, people know how to bill us already. We attach every customer gets a dedicated MakersHub email address. We just do an auto forwarding out of that existing accounting inbox. And we go through that inbox and apply a bunch of intelligence as to, hey, what's a bill and what's not a bill? And that's what populates here in your, basically like your bills tab. And then you'll see in the upper right-hand corner, there's this unprocessed emails tab. So this operates like an inbox where anything that is getting forwarded to your MakersHub address that we don't think is a bill is going to show up here, and there's an unprocessed email. So in the event that something was missed or somebody put a bill like in the HTML of the actual email, you can convert it directly from there. So very much a fetch-like function, yes.
Cool.
All right. Well, Charlie and Nick, appreciate you joining us here today and showing us this new feature. It was great to see you both. Well, not you, Nick, because you weren't at, or were you at Intuit Connect?
I was not. It was nice to, finally get to meet y'all.
We try to keep the true brains of the operation, at home and running, keeping the ship pointed straight. So
got it. Very good. All right. Well, it was great to see you today, and we appreciate you joining us here. Next week, we'll be continuing our conversation with the feature comparison of QuickBooks Enterprise to a cloud-based inventory solution. And we'll look forward to seeing you next week on the Workshop Wednesday. And we hope you all have a great day.
Thank you all.